All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this lunchtime webinar. It's part of the VECAN winter workshops. There was one a couple weeks ago that is also posted on the VECAN website on Complete Streets. Today we'll be talking about community-led resilience hubs. And while I'm thinking of it, in 2 weeks, there will be a follow-up webinar on inter-community idea share. So please join us for that as well. You can sign up through VECAN. But welcome, thanks for being here today. I am Laura Cavan-Bailey. I'm the Climate Economy Program Manager at the Vermont Council on Rural Development.
And I'm Sam Lash, she, hers, and I'm the Climate and Energy Planner from Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission.
And today we're going to be sharing about what are community-led resilience hubs. And so we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. And we're going to start off first with a quick poll just to get a sense of who is in the audience. And I guess a little housekeeping before we get there too. Please remain on mute. Feel free to have your video on or off throughout. And then as questions develop, put them in the chat and we will be monitoring the chat for questions and kind of get to those at the end. So with that, we're going to start off with a poll here to get a sense of who's here today with us. So there are 4 questions. And I've opened the poll. It should pop up in a little white box. There are 4 questions there, so you have to scroll down to answer all 4 before you submit. Once you submit, you can't go back to your answers. So go ahead now and start to fill that in. Where do you live? Where do you work? What sector do you work in? And how you heard about this. So this will be a good trial run for later. We're going to try to dig into a little more meaty substance and would love to get your feedback as well. So great, keep answering. Be sure to scroll down so that you answer all 4 of those questions. But the results are starting to come in here. Looks great. Got about half of the answers in, so we'll give it another 30 seconds here for folks. And also wanted to say that after the webinar, we'll put the poll and the follow-up questions later on into a Google Doc and would love to get people's feedback. So if you are having trouble with the poll, there will be an opportunity to answer later on too, because we do want to get everybody's ideas and thoughts. So I'm going to end the poll and share out the results. The towns don't show up, but what we can look at here is on the third, if you scroll down, the third one is sort of who we are, what sector do you work in? It looks like predominantly nonprofit, some government, for-profit, renewable energy, town energy committees, and others. So kind of a good mix of folks here today with us. All right.
Great. So just to give a little context and objectives for why we're all here today, we understand that there's an overwhelming sort of number of demands on your time and capacity as sort of municipal leaders and community leaders as well. It can be confusing or frustrating trying to figure out where to start. And we know that on top of all of that, there is an unprecedented amount of federal and state funding coming down the pipeline. And we recognize that this is a really important opportunity and sort of an important time, next 5 to 10 years or so to draw down those dollars and invest into our communities. And we want to make sure we do that intentionally, right? So today is kind of an ideas day. It's kind of a sort of a narrative day. So we want to offer one narrative or one framework for how you can sort of relate ongoing projects that you have on your plates together. We know that you might be considering changes to zoning and to town plans around smart growth, thinking about where to site energy facilities, where to site EV charging, and how to manage rural transit. So basically, we just want to offer a narrative to kind of tie all these ideas and decisions together, both for municipal leadership and also for community members. And we want to make sure that also we're sort of assessing what successful models are for implementation to ensure that those decisions that are being made and how the funds are being spent does actually, produce resilience or yield an increase in resilience for all of our communities. And so that's what today is really about. So go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So why community-led resilience hubs? So the concept of resilience hubs sits sort of at the nexus of community and energy resilience, emergency management, climate change mitigation, and social equity, while providing expanded opportunities for communities to be successful before, during, and after disruptions. So we believe that there's a whole host of sort of benefits for particularly our rural communities that we'll get into sort of as we go.
Great. So we know that Vermonters can come together during catastrophes, right? Like hurricanes and prolonged ones like COVID. It takes local champions that step up and they meet the needs where they arise. And they draw on that local knowledge of the right folks to talk to or the right resources that may exist in that area. And they're also able to anticipate the needs of those vulnerable community members and infrastructure that exists within individual communities. And oftentimes that resilience is how it's defined, right? Is how well can you quickly come back from a difficulty or a disaster. But another definition I found says resilience is the capacity to withstand. So it's actually what can be provided on an everyday basis that enables communities to be stronger together, not just during catastrophes, but actually all of the time. Because what we do see is that this ad hoc style of efforts to respond to some kind of a disaster results in delayed deployment or burnout, redundancy, or really lack of even basic needs because that infrastructure hasn't already been put in place within a community. So a resilient community, what we're seeing now is a broader sense of how day-to-day that community works together and really thrives. And there are a lot of folks around the state that are working on these types of initiatives on how to adapt and how to create community. Do want to say a quick shout out to Jim Stiles from St. Albans City, who has been working on this concept and this idea. And it's really what we want to see for the future of our communities is how can these rural communities take on a stance of resilience that really benefits on everyday lifestyle for folks. So we often lack these centralized systems because of our rural nature, but there are opportunities to help identify what those could be in a rural setting and then bring in services and investment into those ideas. So some of the benefits of a resilience hub is that it can reduce energy burdens for communities. It can provide access to heating and cooling centers. It can provide connectivity through broadband or computers, provide healthy and affordable food options, transportation options, well-compensated work or workforce development. All of these efforts will enhance a community and the connectivity between a community, as well as depend upon clean, reliable, and affordable energy as a foundation. So as many of us are starting to see this graphic come up and up, the energy burden within Vermont is very real, and it impacts a lot of folks. It includes the cost for transportation fuels, electricity, as well as heating. And the darker the color, the more energy burdened a community is. And you can see as these layer on each other, it really is impacting the majority of the state for energy prices. And the challenge of ruralness is that the cost of infrastructure is very high, and we need to develop creative solutions and opportunities for how to reconnect on a community level and help to mitigate this energy burden that we see.
Great. So basically, what is this thing of resilience hubs? Where does it come from? Probably a lot of different places, but sort of one of the sort of main ways it's been sort of institutionalized, if you will, is through the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So they have developed a resilience hub model with a lot of resources, and we've put all of the links at the end. So I highly encourage everyone to look at that. And basically, this model really uses a physical space, so that's the building and surrounding infrastructure, in our case, also the surrounding landscape, to focus investment. And by doing so, meet local need and move towards meeting broader energy, community, and economic goals. So basically, again, it just leverages pre-existing and community managed facilities, focuses investment across several different components, which we'll touch on in a second, and basically helps them scale up their year-round services, in addition to taking on some of the complementary roles for emergency management, for recovery, and also take on some community ownership models, perhaps, or sort of community responsibility and engagement in reducing carbon pollution and our emissions. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. Yeah, so our core components of the resilience hubs, as identified by this Urban Sustainability Directors Network, are also the main categories where upgrades to existing community facilities are often needed. And that's okay. That's right. What the whole process is all about, is figuring out how to sort of pull these pieces apart, figure out what's necessary and what's needed in your community. So, obviously, as we just talked about, resilient power, affordable power, clean power is going to underlie a lot of the other services or functions of a resilience hub or an infrastructure. So, for example, reliable backup power to the facility, improved also renewable generation to improve cost effectiveness and sustainability of operations in all modes. Along with power is also, resilient communication, resilient structure itself, so the actual facility buildings, programming and services. So that's really that social infrastructure, that community functions on an everyday basis, and then also resilient operations. So, the idea is to serve in 3 modes. So again, the everyday, disruption or emergencies, and recovery. And you see the 5 core components down the side, and just some examples thrown out there of how they might function differently or the same in each of these modes. And the idea, obviously, here, this is an ideal, right? This looks like a lot, but we'll talk about in a minute, like how we might, where we might start. Great. So defining criteria. So the top, what you see in each of these in black is sort of what's come from this urban sustainability model. And then I've added things in green that are a little bit perhaps more relevant or critical given, how we might want to think about these in Vermont, especially for some of our more resilient communities. And again, we are thinking about, okay, so what would be the basic needs? What would be the very basic criteria one of these resilience hubs would have to meet to be considered one? And then what's sort of phase 2, and then what's phase 3? And the reason, just wanted to put this up there, is to get everybody thinking about what might count, or what we might need, and how we might adapt this model. So if, for example, we might focus less on water capture than somewhere in California, and focus, more on our HVAC, for example, or in our heating. And basically, again, it's pulling these pieces out and while also unifying them under this idea of the resilience hub, because we really want to figure out how to coordinate these decisions together so that in a crisis moment, we don't make a decision that, sort of gets us off this path in the long run. Go ahead. Sorry.
So how to get there, right? So how do we identify what are those core components? And that's going to be dependent on each community. So to have that conversation, you need to meaningfully engage with your community and the broad stakeholders at play. And so really what we've seen as proven engagement strategies includes opportunities to bring people to the table that aren't necessarily here today or at the table typically. So be sure to think through creatively of how to get people to get their thoughts on what is needed in a community. Some proven strategies we've seen are providing translation services, childcare, food. Everybody loves to come together for a shared meal. And then a little bit of talking, transportation options to get people to the conversation, as well as potential stipends for people to participate and share their time. So with this broad community engagement process, then you're able to move into visioning, prioritization, and then have a successful outcome coming through. So here's another image of how that process takes place. So this broad community engagement, as I was speaking to, really is an opportunity for a community to have a conversation of what makes a rural resilience hub for them. What existing assets already occur in that community, what buildings exist that could be utilized in new and different ways. And from that conversation, there can be a prioritization process that then develops these clear priorities. So once a community has those clear priorities, they're able to look for the funding and be able to say, we're ready for this next action. So that next action could be a feasibility study, could be looking at key sites and doing energy audits on those, and then potentially identifying resources that would then enable that implementation of the full resilience hub.
Absolutely. So getting to that community-wide conversation, we had a few recommendations, and sort of one of the key aspects of this model is that co-development between municipal and community leadership, that sort of teamwork. And so, one of the things we really wanted to emphasize is starting off coordinating amongst your town staff, your leadership, your select board, your planning commission, et cetera, getting a list of infrastructure projects and priorities that are already in the pipeline, reviewing your town plans, the plural. You have a lot of them on the shelf. Let's operate and exercise them. There's a lot of listening sessions and community asset inventories and assessments that don't have to be reinvented, but can be updated. And so, looking at who those partners are to help with that different technical assistance, we'll give you some suggestions at the end, and we have some over there in that yellow box. But really making sure to have these initial conversations early and often, because you have ongoing planning processes and updates already going on. You can sort of roll in and start integrating this community resilience hub model and sort of ideas. So it takes real coordination, but it gives people something to hold on to, this vision, how to then move into that process of defining what it really means for your community. And that funding stacking is really critical. So, we want to roll in projects together into this unified vision of a community resilience hub. Obviously, you can't hit everything at once. You have to phase it out. But then we can go back and chunk it out again and figure out, okay, so the municipal energy resilience program may cover that HVAC, those energy assessments for these particular priority buildings. Then there are existing state programs for your ADA accessibility. There's, health equity technical assistant grants to look at the sidewalks. Can the community get to that hub? And better places and placemaking grants to improve from there. And so it's having that vision to help you navigate all those different stacks and those different programs.
And there are so many returns on an investment of co-benefits. The big one being community cohesion and well-being and bringing people together for this shared place and ownership. So that goes on top of and beyond any physical energy cost savings, social access to social services, resources, all those places, things can become this mutually beneficial growth from this center.
Absolutely. And we are not starting from scratch. This model isn't starting from scratch. Really, the question we're trying to ask is, these models exist and people have been working on it already in Vermont on an ad hoc basis. So let's think together about what this model, how we might adapt some of the resources that exist for some of the urban examples and adapt them for us. So we, just threw up a wide variety here, and I'm just going to go not too quickly, but quickly through a few examples. And let me be clear that these are not Resilience Hub projects. These are just sort of organically grown, community centers, and exactly the type of place that would make a great candidate for some of this work. And these are just a few of many. So great. So, just thinking briefly, this could be a community store. So I just threw up the Elmore store. I had great Firetown pizza the other day there, but it's a community collaboration. There's a professional kitchen that can be scaled up for food storage and to provide meals. Post office, so everybody in the community knows where it is. Everyone has a reason to go there already. It's a gathering place. There's recreation. I don't need to read all of these things here, but these are just some of the things that popped into mind. Then on the right, you see, okay, so what would it need? Transportation. How are people going to get there in times of need? What is the energy system that's supporting the building? Can it be expanded? Can other neighboring buildings be integrated into renewable generation facility? And then, looking at building retrofits, et cetera. Totally different candidate could be the old schoolhouse common in Marshfield. It's a municipal building, has the library, the Onion River food shelf serves 7 towns already. Internet has a 3-tracker solar system that could be amped up to support more capacity. And there's a lot of recreation paths, fields, and services already built in there. And it has a commuter route. Don't want to go too long. Okay. So another one is we have so many family farms, and we have a lot of agro-tourism farms as well. And so just picked one, the Course Farm Dairy. They have a solar array, again, that could be scaled up. There's an apprenticeship program, so workforce development. They're already working with land trust, so there's community investment, environmental stewardship, so looking at growing fruit trees alongside the cows there, and there's school program supporting schools through food and milk. And so again, looking at, okay, is there a gathering place? How does it fit into emergency management? And what's the transportation like? Just put a few other examples up here and sort of skip down. It could be anything from Rabble Rousers in Montpelier that provides free lunch and is a great co-working space. Or the Northfield Community Kiosk, which is a bus station that now has a shelter and a bunch of resources, and tack on some Wi-Fi, and that's a great start. And that nods to something that Jim wisely said recently about sometimes you got to think small and specific and then see how you can scale up. Yeah. So obviously what you might not see on here are one of the most obvious, and that's because we're going to hand it over to Vince and Ned, because it's libraries. That's that key collaboration often between municipal and community leadership and champions there. So already provide a huge range of services, and I won't take up any more time and hand it over.
Yeah, so now we will hear from Ned Houston and Vince O'Connell at the Craftsbury Energy Committee about their work.
Great, well, thank you guys. So I wear, like many people in little towns, a lot of different hats, and I was the chair of the library board. I've been on the energy committee a long time. Libraries had a long history of kind of serving as a community center, particularly when there's power outages, because people could come and do internet things at the library often. We wanted to make sure that could go forward. And so we started thinking about some kind of backup power system. We've also wanted to do more solar at the library for a long time, like over a decade since we were in that new building. And the question always was how to afford things. So with some grant from some people, our general supporters, we were going to just put in a conventional sort of propane generator. That was the plan. But I was not overly excited about that for the energy reasons and for the noise reasons, for the maintenance reasons. I wanted a more long-term vision. And fortunately, we have a lot of friends in the library, including Vince, who has done a lot of work and installed his own sort of microgrid in his house. He led a proposal which we put before the town for a microgrid. They weren't quite ready to jump on it yet, but it occurred to us that the library could be an ideal model site. And it does a lot of things. It provides this emergency communication so people could come there and work uninterrupted, is what I'm trying to say. The library itself is a community center for many people. It serves as access to all kinds of information. And this is even more important. A number of the things that get mentioned these days, warmth centers, cooling centers, places to work, access to critical services, all of which could be enhanced by a good backup system. So with Vince sort of urging us on and helping me try to think about, well, how could we possibly afford this? And he mentioned we could make use of community expertise and sort of leverage that volunteer possibility with expertise that's in the community. So that's what led us to come up with this idea. We have grant support for it. The town was interested in our proposal, so we received some ARPA money for this project. We've had grants from BCRD and other private people and public people together, which allows us to see a way to fund us if we can make use of our volunteer resources. And I just want to say a huge thanks to Vince for doing a huge amount of legwork and a great deal of backup work, information, and cheerleading for this. So that's the background from the library's perspective. This is a long-term project. We're excited to get there. And Vince is going to outline how the project actually seems to roll out for us. We've already spent a bunch of money, and we have a bunch of panels and a wonderful battery system in our basement awaiting our efforts to put it all into place, which will happen soon. So thank you. And Vince, go ahead.
Vince, you're muted.
Okay, so hi, I'm Vince O'Connell. I'm on the Craftsbury Energy Committee and also Commissioner at Hardwick Electric, which is an interesting combination. But in any case, let's see, I'll just jump right into it. So Ned gave a great introduction, and this was to some extent an outgrowth of a much larger proposal that I brought to the town and to the utility, which essentially required more time for them to absorb to be able to move forward on. But in any case, the goals of the library are the ones, a lot of the ones that Laura and Sam were talking about: emergency shelter, communications, and another big thing is just the reduction of CO2 emissions and conforming with the climate action plan, Vermont's climate action plan. We like the idea of an education component, which will include real time. It would just be the embedding. We just embedded on the website the production and use of power, along with graphics, the typical kind of interface you have with those apps. As well, I think we're going to do some tours also. When we open it up, so people can see that it's there. They become aware of it. It gives them an idea of what's possible. So the funding Ned talked about, and we came up with a budget of $26,000. And I'd gotten prices from a couple of solar installers, and one was for $47,000, and one was for $59,000. So obviously, there were some savings to be had if we were able to do it ourselves. So I'm just listing the obstacles. Another obstacle is the permitting. Since this is a public building, requires an electrical permit and a building permit, which requires a structural engineer's stamp. And the electrical permit, because of a relationship I had with the electrician who signed off on my own installations, he was aware that he knew that the quality of the work would be at least acceptable for him to allow us to use his master's electrician's license without any risk to his career. Anyway, he's really helpful, and they're doing the final interconnection with the utility. The structural stuff is a bit more challenging because if you don't have that drawing from the building, you're going to need to get a structural analysis. I'm working on that right now. It's proven to be a bit more problematic getting responses from engineers, but in any case, that'll happen. So the two ways of doing this is the one I just talked about, having a professional do it, and I can go back to the developing a good workforce, is to have professional installation. And like I said, for a smaller system than we're actually installing, it was way more than twice as much, or more than twice as much for one, and almost twice as much for the other. So I designed a system which has a lot of variables, but in any case, it's almost 10 kilowatts, same storage for 26,000. And with the IRA solar and storage credit, which the storage credit comes into play this year, that's the Inflation Reduction Act. The final cost would be about 18,200, which is pretty amazing for this size and type of system. That'll allow the library to then install a heat pump, which will, yeah, as it says here, substantially offset carbon footprint and provide an additional, a more complete model of what renewable energy complete renewable energy system in a building will look like. Now here's just a little picture measuring the roof, carrying some panels. Okay, so this is something I really want to emphasize. The cons of doing it DIY is, like I said, a misnomer, is that it really requires a substantial amount of professional knowledge, having a relationship with a master electrician. Yeah, you have to determine the critical loads, evaluate the type of system, ground mount, roof mount, where are you going to put it, what's the possible solar yield going to be, how big do you have to make it, what are the building requirements, you know, how big are you going to make the critical load panel, which vendors are you going to use. I mean, I went through probably 50 iterations of systems with vendors to get prices to minimize the costs. But it's all doable. It's just, you know, it is painstaking, and DIY really oversimplifies it. You just have to have a little experience. So recommendations for DIY option. I took this course a couple of years ago. There's a link right here. I can put it in the chat too. It's great. It's $200. The guy does it as essentially a labor of love. He teaches this at Ohio University and another place. And you get a textbook, and you come out being able to design a system and know what all the variables are and what you need to think about. And it has workshops every Tuesday at noon, and is always available for further questions. It's really great. Let's see. There's that. Okay, here's a big thing. We aren't able to benefit from this because we're in hydroelectric territory. But if you're in Green Mountain Power or Vermont Electric Co-op utility territory, they'll pay you to have a certain number of discharges from your battery in order to reduce their peak loads. And it ends up being a substantial amount of money, and it gives a reasonable ROI on the storage. I mean, I'll just make a quick aside. Vermont does not mandate storage, and it should. All the other New England states do. And there are a lot of really good reasons for it. I won't get into them here, but the main thing is that it helps reduce the peak demands, and it saves the utilities money, and it saves the users money, and it really offsets a lot of carbon. So in any case, if you're not in Green Mountain Power territory or VC territory, write a letter to your utility. And yeah, anyway, okay, so this is just part of the permittable plans I was creating. This is the location on the library. You know, basically we did a site assessment to figuring out, okay, where are we going to put it on the ground and put it on the roof. So this is south facing. This is south facing, and I optimized this. I wanted to use bigger panels, but there's an incredible deal on these panels, and they're smaller, and I was able to fit them in. So we have an exact number of panels per string. Anyway, just a bunch of technical details. Now, getting back to the labor force issue, creating a educated labor force, I think that's really important, and you don't want to displace the labor force, but I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration, for professionals to maybe provide not a complete installation service, but like an oversight service. And I know of someone that does that, and that they provide they'll give you the components and then they'll come through and check stuff. But, that kind of, that really fits into the whole resilience and community-based self-reliance kind of culture that I think everybody's interested in here. And it's also much more efficient. It's not New York City after all. These are like other considerations, where you have to put warnings and stuff. So I just put this in here to, again, emphasize that you really need to know what you're doing, but it is absolutely possible. And by either taking a course or working with a particular installer that's willing to provide part services, and you end up saving a bunch of money, it becomes more affordable. So anyway, that's I guess pretty much it. If anybody has any questions or anything, be happy to try and answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll just make it up.
Great. I think let's hold questions till the end. We have just a couple poll things that we want to do to get a sense of what people have in their communities. So Vince, do you have?
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna. You still had a slide up, so I wasn't sure if you had. If I cut you off too soon. Sorry.
No. I can put it back up. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I think unless you have something else to add for this.
Okay. No.
Okay.
No. I'll probably think of something in like 20 seconds, but never mind.
Okay. Great. Well, we are hoping to have at least 15 minutes for Q&A at the end, if not a little bit more than that. So continue to put your questions in the chat. Do you have something else? Okay.
No, I can save it.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for that overview. And it's just like a little snippet into what communities are doing to start to incrementally get towards these overall resilience goals and community enhancement projects. So thanks so much for that. I do want to dive into, let's see, the second poll here. I'm going to launch it now. So it's going to be like the first one where it comes up on your screen. And this is, where does your community gather now? So there's different categories here. We were only able to put in 10 options, but definitely fill that in. And then there's a second part to it. If you have other community spaces, what are those? And put that in the second answer. We want to get a kind of an overview snapshot of where people are already coming together as a community. What are those existing resources? We'll give everyone a minute here. Looks like handful, and be sure to scroll down if you want to add in other and then submit the poll. You do have to scroll up and down to see all the options, but great. We've got about half the responses submitted. We'll give it another 20 seconds here. And then we'll share out results so you all be able to see what others have added.
And when we pass around slides and video recording, we'll also include some of these results too in a more manageable, digestible format too. Just so, if you happen to want to make a case to anybody in your town, you have some of that available too. And definitely to what Vince said, looking at towns that are interested in developing these ideas with you as a cohort is something that, we as regional energy planners are definitely trying to support and offer workshops in order to do some of that as well. But also, it's something we highly encourage on the ground as well.
Great. So here are the results. Library, town hall, town office, municipal buildings, school buildings are all coming up as very high contenders. But as you can see, there's a pretty good spread throughout of what is considered a community space where people gather now. I'm going to stop sharing that, and we've got a third last poll here that I will launch now. And this is more of a ranking of future community hub, like where do you see the aspect of a resilience hub being the most important for you the way you envision your community? What should be included? Is it necessary, not necessary, or extremely necessary would be the 5 rank. So 0 would be like, no, we don't need that option, but we definitely need the next one. So it gives a sort of a weighted option for each of these aspects of a community hub. So again, scroll down to be able to see there are 3 questions. The first one has lots of options that you get to weight and rank. And then the second question is to rank what your town needs to get there. What are some of the barriers that you're feeling towards implementation? So be sure to scroll down and answer all the questions before submitting. And the last is a free-form answer of what a rural resilience hub needs.
And feel free to throw in keywords there too.
Yeah. Great, so we'll give everybody a couple minutes here. Great, thanks of you that have submitted. We'll still have another minute here, keep working through. And really we're excited to use this information as an opportunity to say, oh, where can we start to think differently or more creatively about implementation, and or maybe it's all of these factors, and just sort of reiterating that interconnected need for communities.
Absolutely. And I know that, sometimes I see, what I think is an obvious connection, it's nice to have that either confirmation that I'm hitting that, correctly, or maybe not. Maybe there's a different idea, or a different combination of things that is more necessary. And obviously these will vary town to town. And this isn't by no means binding. It's meant to, again, just sort of get those wheels turning, which we know already are, but really, to help see all the projects that sort of usually get focused on one at a time. Let's pull those together into a grand narrative that's going to be compelling to get some funding, but also sort of give everybody in the community and honestly, all the volunteers something to hold on to, so we can see what we're building together.
So we'll give it another, say, 30 seconds here. So folks, feel free to answer what you can, and then we will also send out the poll again in sort of follow up or have it on the VECAN website. We'll talk with Greta and Sarah about logistics that way, but we do want to keep gathering this type of information from communities, and really value that feedback and want to share at least what folks are saying today here with you. So I'll end the poll and share back the results. So it may be a little tricky to read per se, but so on the left side, the blue and dark blue is less necessary, not necessary. And on the right side, the red is the extremely necessary. So you can start to see the weighted desires. So looking at kind of the yellow and red bars together are the 4 5s. So a lot of these options are coming up with over 50% are saying that those are really critical. You can see connectivity, Wi-Fi phones, that is the most desired kind of out of this. Let's see, childcare, senior center, those are all up in there with a lot of high responses. And if you just keep scrolling down, the second question of rank what your town needs to get there. Community vision, right there is a huge need. The technical assistance prioritization, understanding resources available, all those things need to get the project forward. This is a way to start to suss out what is the most important: community volunteers, grant support. Great. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing the poll. Thank you all for that information. And we had one last slide just of resources that'll be in the slide deck. Do you want me to pull it up now, or should we just say
we don't have to pull it up necessarily, but I do just want to point out that I think a lot of the needs that we're hearing and that we're seeing right now, there is increasingly technical assistance available, but it's really scattered throughout different agencies and different organizations, and some of which are not always talking to one another all the time. We're really working on that. We've seen a ton of improvement lately, but one of the things that we try to do at the RBCs, and definitely VCRD does, and VECAN among others, is you have a lot of us trying to work together, making sure that we're aggregating those, and working with VLCT also to create some funding stacks and some matrices that basically will say, hey, here's a model project, or a model vision. Here are all the different bits and pieces. As you're designing it, here's how you could stack some funding, just as some suggestions. And you'll see some of those included in that last slide that I'll highlight, including the Municipal Energy Resilience Grant Program that everyone, I'm sure, is used to hearing a lot about, that we throw around a lot. Applications are still being designed, so no one's missing out on anything, but it is coming up. So that's up to $500K for those big projects. Okay, let's look at that solar array. Let's look at that. Well, really, let's focus first on the building envelope and the fuel transition. But let's get some of those big municipal projects done and integrate as much as we can. And having a vision like this helps it seem less as a one-off, and really figures out, like, okay, let's not rip that building wall apart 3 times in a row, or that piece of sidewalk up 3 times in a row. Let's make sure we have a plan going forward. And you already have a lot: your town's plans, your local hazard mitigation plans, your capital improvement plans. And so, it's a matter of obviously capacity, which is a big issue, but there's more and more of us here to support you. So making sure that we're doing that is this is a good check.
Great. So again, put your questions in the chat and we'll get to those. The first one, I think it's back towards Vince. Is this a microgrid? And you spoke to it, but I want you to just highlight the difference between your project and a microgrid.
It is a microgrid. Any kind of grid connected energy system that can disconnect and run independently is a microgrid. It can be a single house, it can be an entire city. To some extent, you could say that the country itself is a microgrid, just a big one. And actually it's not, because we have power lines going into Canada and Mexico too. But in any case, it is a microgrid. And yeah, okay.
Thank you.
And if I could just really quickly highlight something that Vince said, and I think we said it at sort of at the beginning, but that integrated resource planning that includes that, solar plus storage or complementary generation and storage there is really key. And that's something that, we're working with utilities on being able to provide some tools and some data layers to help towns do that. We know that is a need for sure.
You want to speak to
So there's a great question: opportunities to integrate the resilient hub idea into ongoing FEMA hazard mitigation planning. Big smile on my face. Yes, these are not distinct programs, not at all. Terrific question. Absolutely, absolutely. So, I can see if this is, a town that's maybe coming new to this idea, this could be, have an all-town commission plus a few community leaders conversation around a resilience hub, talk to some entities, and then, basically look at either applying to VCRD's, program, or working with a regional or working with regional planning commission, setting that first action of how to kick off the process, and doing that community engagement in particular. That could be one of your mitigation actions, right? in your hazard mitigation plan, and teaming up, with another town to do so also could make sense in the context of another one as well. And this is another thing, is you can also do pieces in the plan. So you can also talk about doing a co-located heating and cooling centers, right? That can be a piece that you highlight in a hazard mitigation plan, but then you feature as part of your resilience hub in a town plan, for instance. Sometimes these are stacked. So but it's a matter of getting pieces in and then referencing that larger idea. So no, great idea.
All right, then Carol Vassar asked, when will IRA funds become available?
$1 million question. No, billions of dollars of questions. So it really depends on which funds within the bill we're talking about. And some of those are going to come to the state as state programs. Some of those are going to be, application-based programs at the federal level. So you have the energy efficiency and conservation block program, for example, that towns are starting to apply for. So there's all these different bits and pieces. And basically, one of those resources on your last slide is the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And they have a great guidebook they just put together for Vermont specifically about which ones Vermonters are not only going to be eligible for, but ideal for, what our communities are going to be, really well poised to take advantage of. And it's sorted out by topic area. So there's a climate, energy, and environment subsection. So that's going to be a great place to look there, and then keep talking to your RPCs and to VLCT, among others. And
it looks like VECAN too.
And VECAN, yes, absolutely.
Website.
Would you mind if I answered a couple of questions?
Yeah.
I mean, there's one it seems unrelated, but I guess Mr. Echeverria about the heat pump oil burner. I would suggest going to, even though it's not specifically related to this, go to Efficiency Vermont and look up under heat pumps and installers and rebates. There are huge rebates available for cold climate heat pumps. And that'd be the place to go, to Efficiency Vermont, their website. And there was a direct message. I'm sorry, but I'd like to answer this generally about how does the $7,500 tax credit work for town properties. Now, that's an actual interesting development under IRA, is that you don't need some awkward third-party entity to funnel the funds through. It'll be a check coming directly from the IRS to the town or to a nonprofit or to an in any case, I don't know what the rules are specifically right now, and I'm not even sure if they've been published yet. But that is how it's supposed to work, and the funding has been appropriated.
Yeah, so that upfront direct payment is a huge I don't want to say win necessarily. No, it is. It's a win for municipalities, and that's one of the reasons why we're having conversations like this. It's like, okay, all those projects that were like, okay, that's too big, or that's whatever, too complicated. We have it still is, but there's a little bit of a leg up now with that direct payment, absolutely. And I think the final rulings are still coming out, but yep.
And one other comment question that Vince, maybe you want to speak to a little bit, but it was something else to consider, is that a generator requires ongoing maintenance, have a small lifespan, and then we'll need additional grants or funding down the line. And I'd be curious, in the Craftsbury project, how much of that sort of operational or sort of life cycle costs you looked at, because we need to start looking long-term, right? And so often projects have that upfront initial cost, even though they may last much longer than the alternative cost. And so would be curious if that came up in conversations at all and enabled people to see with a broader timeline the benefits of the solar and the battery backup.
Sure, that raises a bunch of interesting questions, and it isn't all roses. I mean, there's embedded energy in the mining of aluminum, and the creation of silicone, but the industry information is that I can't remember what it is. It's about 4 to 5 years for the battery, and 3 to 4 for the offset, for it to reach a threshold of conventional fossil-based fuel generation. So, I mean, you hit that point where afterwards you're 100% green. And there's a question of, you know, a lot of people bring up the issue of what do you do with the components after their lifespan's ended. Well, you know, and they think that it's like a pump, you know, it turns at midnight, it turns into a pumpkin. It continues to produce. It's just there's a slow degradation of output with solar panels. 25 years is a good number, and they'll still produce probably 70% at that point. And batteries also, you know, you have the lifespan of a lithium iron phosphate battery, you know, maybe 10 years and it's at 80%. So it'll continue to produce. And the Department of Energy is spending a lot of money in helping industry develop recycling infrastructure so they can reclaim the lithium, you know, just make it a much more of a well-developed infrastructure like the fossil fuel infrastructure was developed, you know, when that started being put in place in late 19th century.
Absolutely. And a few of us are dreaming up upcycling distribution systems locally, right? Because the big thing is how do you move, you know, heavy equipment. And we're not talking industrial scale as much in Vermont, obviously, as other places are looking at. But you know, there's some potential there of upcycling some of those when they're not at their peak efficiency, but obviously still have a long life left. So good questions.
The next question is the model of funding you're speaking to related to the toolkit that the Climate Action Office is working on a municipal resilience toolkit that's supposed to come out this spring or summer. And I would say just VCRD has been in conversation with the Climate Action Office about what that is, but a lot of it seems to be focused on sort of the mitigation and also sort of resiliency in the way of FEMA kind of defined areas of potential catastrophe kind of areas. But we are in conversation, and as that becomes developed, I think there's a great opportunity for continuing to add resources to it for municipalities to use as an underlying option to start to see where they fall on that and what other tools exist towards assessing their resiliency and what they can do towards improving it.
Yeah, and one of the things is, you know, as we try to do is aggregate those developing toolkits and indices. We're seeing a lot of different indices come out, a lot of different frameworks. And so one of the things, you know, for those, I know there's a lot of familiar faces, so I'm sure I'm a little bit of a broken record, is that, you know, constantly putting those in conversation with one another is one of the things that we try to do and have, you know, and also ensure that, you know, we advocate that using a particular one isn't going to hamstring one application over another, and that there's conversations amongst them, and you know, and some consistency across metrics. So I'd say same for the toolkits. We're at the stakeholder meeting providing resources and feedback, and so a lot of the funding stacking is similar to that, and you know, they're looking at drawing down the same funding. And so, you know, use those resources that are in that toolkit towards building your resilience hub. You know, they're not mutually exclusive whatsoever. They're totally entangled, and you know, we're all trying to work together to support towns to do so. So, yeah.
We're at 1 o'clock here and want to just thank you all for joining us today. And this is being recorded, so feel free to share it with others, as well as the follow-up slides and resources that will come after the fact from the VECAN network. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Vincent, for sharing.
Thank you so much. Bye. And thank you to all who've been working on this for, you know, for so long, and for, you know, yeah, continuing the conversation and keeping it going.